Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, March 26th, and we will hear the presentation, GitHub for Planners. For technical help during the webcast, you can type your questions in the chat box found in the GoToWebinar tool panel, and I'll do my best to try to help you out. For your content questions related to the presentation, again, just type those in the chat box in your GoToWebinar tool panel. We will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Coming up next on your screen is a list of our sponsoring APA chapters and divisions for 2021. Thanks to all those participating and for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today, we are sponsored by the APA Technology Division. So thanks to you guys for putting this session together. I'm looking forward to hearing all about it. You'll hear more from them in just a moment. Coming up next on your screen is a list of our upcoming webcasts for April. So you can head over to our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast, to register for those. We're actually booked all the way through June. We're taking July sessions right now. We're just kind of tightening up information for all of those for May and June, and we'll get them posted on our website shortly. So be sure to head over to register for all of our upcoming sessions. This session has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing. You can head over to planning.org and log into your MyAPA account. From there, you can search either by today's title or event number, both of which can be found on our webcast webpage for you to get those 1.5 CM credits. Make sure you like us on Facebook if you're on Facebook. That's where I post any important timely information like a date or a time change, or when there's new sessions available for you to register for. I post it there so you know. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We record all of our sessions and post them onto our channel. And so by subscribing, you'll get notified when we have a new video up there. We'll also have a PDF copy of the slide deck available from today's session on our webcast webpage, again, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. So just as a reminder, if you have questions for our presenters throughout today's session, just type them in your chat box and we'll answer them at the end during our Q&A. So that's the end of my housekeeping items. I am now going to change the controls over to David to kick things off. Looks good.
Thank you, Christine. We're good. Everything looks good. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us for GitHub for Planners.
I think you went and muted yourself somehow. There you go.
I guess, did I get to say thank you for joining us it was weird. Okay. Well, housekeeping on my end. I want to go over, what is the American Planning Association and Technology Division. For those not familiar, the American Planning Association is one of the largest professional associations of domestic and international planners. We exist to serve the needs of practicing planners, and we have 47 regional chapters and 27 technical divisions, one of which is the Technology Division. And we are a group that have planners and technologists with a shared interest in how technology can assist in the planning and design and decision-making process for our regions and cities. We are a subdivision of the American Planning Association. And when you join the APA Technology Division, we'll let you know about great webinars like this one and other resources that can assist you with your work. We are here to help you grow and succeed in your career and make the best use of technology as part of your practice. In terms of upcoming events for the Technology Division, we are working with APA on a planning technology in the future of your career MPC webinar that will be done during the National Planning Conference. There will also be an annual Technology Division meeting around that time. And we also have APA elections. So if you're interested in getting involved, we are looking at electing a secretary and chair for the Technology Division. And also there are going to be future webinars on topics ranging from AI, equity, engagement, and other connections to technology from those topics. And yeah, we're also going to try and have continued engagement on GitHub. One of the repositories we're going to be talking about is the Planning Technology Resources Repository that we use as an example to facilitate this training and session. And we invite anybody who's interested to participate and use it as a way to learn more. In terms of your presenters, myself, I'm David Wasserman. I'm an AICP certified planner. I'm the data science practice leader at Alta, where I work at the intersection of urban informatics, 3D visualization, geospatial, and visual storytelling. My current focus areas are kind of enabling data-informed scenario planning and incorporating civic data science into planning projects with web delivery, computer vision derived data sets, and also generating accessibility metrics that can help identify the possible benefits of projects and who they go to. And my co-presenter, good friend, Marshall Ballard. Marshall, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Marshall Ballard. I'm a self-proclaimed data liberator and the co-lead of data science practice at Fehr Peers. I'm also the lead GIS administrator there. I'm an interdisciplinary geographer, certified GIS professional, and an advocate for government open data. And my current focus revolves around assisting jurisdictions to understand how to improve data management practices, advancing mobility performance metrics for transit agencies, and integrating climate adaptation planning strategies for transportation.
Cool. In terms of our outline, basic things, we're going to talk about why we're going to talk about this. We will go through, and by that I mean like why is this important to planners and planning at large. We will go over what is GitHub and Git and the distinctions between them. And we'll give some examples of planning repositories that might be great examples of how resources can be, what types of resources you can find on GitHub. And also, we're going to go through the mechanics of how GitHub works, including how to construct dialogues through issues, cloning repositories, bring them onto your local drive, talking about what is Markdown, which is a markup language used for GitHub, and how to change a repository you own, change repositories that others own, contribute to larger open source efforts. And we'll kind of go through that process, and at the end we're going to kind of navigate a few repositories, including the Planning Technology Resources Repository as an example. So why talk about this? If we hear code is new concrete or data is new oil, it might be a good idea to understand what the mixer and refineries look like. It's not a super controversial thing to say, but tools like Git are there and used to enhance collaboration across open source software communities, and all of us likely use software. All of us likely use software that is managed using Git or GitHub. As a resource, GitHub enables us to avoid reinventing the wheel when we look at how we can solve a civic problem. And in addition, planners have an opportunity to engage with technologists and inform their work if they feel comfortable reaching out and asking questions that are relevant to their communities and needs. So how can GitHub help planners in planning? There are a few things to think about. There's lots of cool and free things on the internet. And even when you need to pay attention to the licensing of a tool, most things on GitHub are provided with very permissible licenses. You can talk directly with technologists about the software you're interested in through issues. You can develop your own personal portfolios and web pages with GitHub. And increasingly, software is eating the world of transportation, and as a result, being conversant with GitHub can help you understand the conversations that are leading to the future evolutions of the emerging technologies that we're trying to understand and plan our communities around. Also, open source software can enable bottom-up solutions to civic problems. It can potentially be a new forum of engagement that is more action-oriented than others. And being digitally savvy helps your city understand what the best solutions for your community's problems may be. So we have some slides dedicated to talk about the types of resources that can be found on GitHub, and we picked out a few of only a small subset that are illustrative of the benefits of understanding this resource. And the first set is data and data specifications can be found on GitHub. So for example, there's a data specification that's openly defined and talked about on GitHub and hosted by Shared Streets called Curb LR. It is a data specification to help planners understand how to represent their curbside regulations so that everybody can have a shared understanding of what those regulations are, and they can publish them in a way that vendors can interact with. There's also US building footprints. It is a repository of AI-derived building footprints across the United States provided by Microsoft. This is when they demonstrated some of the power of computer vision and remote sensing by looking at aerial imagery across the US and identifying buildings at a very large scale. Other repositories talk to open source routing platforms and visualization tools. So for example, the first one here, Open Trip Planner. This is an open source intermodal trip planner that allows the integration of GTFS, which is the general transit feed specification, GTFS real-time, general bike shared feed specification data and ride hailing into a single trip planner. There are over 100 deployments of it, and example deployments include those by TriMet and MARTA, SEPTA, and MBTA. Additionally, there's Kepler GL, originally developed by Uber and pushed onto an open source community repository as part of the urban computing landscape. And it enables anybody who wants to make really fast and fancy geospatial visualizations to engage with that tool and create them very quickly. Additionally, there are familiar engagement and design tools that are worth mentioning on GitHub as well. One example is StreetMix. This is a web application that enables professionals and the public to quickly create cross-section scenarios for street redesigns. And a similar tool for professionals is the Complete Street Rule project I maintain. And this is a scenario-oriented design tool that enables users within the ArcGIS City Engine platform to quickly create 3D multimodal streets and scenarios. So now we're going to transition a little bit more into the mechanics of Git. You know, these repositories provide a great example of how civic technologists can provide resources for the planning profession. But as we shift to talking about how we build things on GitHub, one of the resources we're going to revisit later in the presentation is the Planning Technology Resources repo, which we'll talk about at the end. But before we get to talk about that, we need to think more about what is Git, what is GitHub, and what are the mechanics of how to use it. And for that, I'm going to pass it on to Marshall.
Great, thanks, David. So moving into the next slide, what is Git? And essentially Git is a software for tracking changes in either your software development or a data specification being developed. And as David had provided us a nice overview of some example repositories of data specifications and software applications themselves, Git is the foundation of how those softwares were being created and how those data specifications evolved over time in an iterative approach. And together, we'd like to invite you to build the APA planning technology resources together with us using Git. Next slide, please. So some deeper details on what is Git. It's, essentially it was originally created for software development, but it really provides an amazing opportunity for collaboration and even technical project management as you become a little bit more ingrained in technical aspects of your work in the planning field. So it creates a traceable history of your updates. It enables you to collaborate with all who have access into the repository itself. Those repositories can be open to the public, or you could also have a private version of that. And it's really become the standard around software development and solutions, which follow a typical life cycle of creating and generating like a working version, and then having a staging version, and then a development version, and finally your production version, which goes live. Next slide, please. So more specifically, we want to talk about GitHub itself. And GitHub is a popular Git-powered repository solution available on the cloud under multiple tiers of licensing. It's a Microsoft subsidiary, and it's really one of the largest development communities out there. It's cloud-based. It's an amazing software itself. It has thousands and thousands of software projects. It's somewhere that if you go to a coding academy, they're going to have you begin to create your projects in your homework right in there. But you can find projects, as David had mentioned, a bunch of great examples. A lot of those are available in GitHub itself. Data specifications live there, as well as a variety of other applications. So it can be public, it can be private. They also have a great software that you can download to use on your own desktop. So, and I'll talk about that shortly. Next slide, please. So something to reflect on, and please take a few seconds to read through this, but we want you to understand some basic terminology. These are common terms that you should familiarize yourself with to better understand what technologists are doing inside of Git, and what they're creating for us planners and engineers in the applications that were, David highlighted earlier, and you're going to begin to explore in the planning resources that we've created online. It's a great place to start to learn how to use Git and how to apply it. So take a few seconds, read through this. Also understand that there's a hyperlink at the bottom that gives you a glossary of a lot of these terms. So we're going to be using these terms throughout the rest of the presentation. So some of the tools to use: GitHub Desktop. It's an easy to use GUI. It connects to any Git URL and directly to GitHub. If you have an enterprise GitHub account, it's something that you can lock in. So we highly encourage that you download it and learn to use it. It's very easy to use, super easy to install. They push their updates very frequently, and it's super easy to refresh it and get the latest update for it. A few other tools that you may come across are what's called Git Bash, which kind of goes along with GitHub Desktop, but it's a command line tool, so it may not be necessarily something that you're comfortable with up front. But there's different applications of how you can use it, and if you get more proficient in Git, it's something that you can use just as the tool itself rather than using a GUI-based application. Then there's some text editors that fully embed and integrate with Git. And my personal favorite is Microsoft Visual Studio Code, which just recently released a full integration with the Apple operating system. So, but also a couple other noteworthy text editors are Sublime and Notepad++, as they're fully capable of working in Git and pushing Git updates out as well. Next slide, please. So one of the other things that we really encourage everybody to do is, build your network and review issues in repositories. As you become more familiar with using GitHub or any other Git repository system, you can talk to these the owners of the repositories. So you can easily file an issue. You can ask a question through an issue. It allows you to engage with the software owner or the repository owner itself, or the data specification owner, and engage with them and really begin to build your technical network. And it's an important piece of this. And one of the screenshots on here is referring to Cutter at the University of South Florida, and that's the Center for Urban Transportation Research. They created this absolutely amazing repository of awesome transit resources that are available there, and it really digs in and dives very deeply into transit data resources and transit software resources that are available. So it's easy to put an issue in there, and there are really great folks down there, a lot of people that are very approachable and willing to engage and love to get feedback. So we highly encourage you, once you find a repository of interest, just submit an issue, ask a question, reach out to them, and yeah, it'll be a great experience for you. Next slide, please. So now getting into a little bit more of the terminology here, we're going to talk about cloning and cloning a repository. So, using cloning, and what you'll hear about in a couple of minutes more, is forking. But cloning itself is basically creating a local copy of the files in the repository. And sometimes there's different preferences in whether you want to clone or you want to fork. But right now, for cloning, what I like to use is a folder on my C drive, then I just name it GitHub, or for our internal purposes at Fehr Peers, we have an internal server called GitLab, and I simply clone a repository out of that when I need to deploy a new software solution for a client. And using GitHub Desktop, you're able to clone based off of the URL. So if you have an internal server hosting the solutions, you just enter that URL. Otherwise, you can easily enter in the GitHub URL. And as you can see in the screenshot, it's github.com/API Technology Division. And that's the repository that we're going to take you on a little tour of a little bit later. Next slide, please. So as David mentioned earlier, Markdown, it's a text-based formatting language that you really need to use and become familiar with in order to create a human readable text and flow to your repository, if you will. So it gives you, it's very similar to the old HTML markup language in the sense of how do you create headers and lists, and how do you call out images or links and emphasize specific words or context. And I mean, it has a very loose feel to writing some code. There's a hyperlink at the bottom to a cheat sheet, and it's super easy to learn how to use. And once you begin to see how to create a formatted text maybe in a README file, it becomes very easy and very familiar. And it gets you a little bit into coding if it's something that you're interested in getting to. So at this point, I'll pass it back over to David to talk about a few of the other core terms and functions.
Thanks, Marshall. So I'm going to talk about pushing changes to a repository you own. So this is one that you've created a new repo on either GitHub or some other platform to work from. And it helps understand the basics of Markdown to kind of make the edits that I'm showing here. But once you do understand them, you can make edits to the readable text of repositories pretty quickly. In this example, I opened up a software called Notepad++. It's nothing fancy, it's just a text editor. And then I opened up a Markdown file in the Planning Technology Resources repository, and I made some text edits to add a new resource. In this case, turf.js, a geospatial library for web applications. And once I made these changes, once these edits were made, I can save the file, go back to GitHub Desktop, and you will see the changes immediately in your GitHub Desktop, with red being deletions, green being additions. To commit this change, I would hit that button at the bottom that says commit to master. Typically, it's a good practice to say what you're doing before you hit commit to master. So in this case, I wrote a quick note for a title and then added a description. As part of that process, you can tag people that you're working with so that they get a notification about the changes that you're making. And once you commit it, you've locally registered that change of the repository on your computer. Now we need to push the result back up to the cloud. So once we hit push to origin, where that arrow is pointing over there, we should be able to see those changes be reflected on the web page. And you can see on the web page to the right, that turf.js is reflected in our repo. Its text is bolded for the title, and the hyperlinks look right for the two things that we want to show about it. And now I'm going to pass it off to Marshall to tell us about how to do pull requests to other people's repositories.
Thanks, David. So in this case, what I did is I ended up forking the planning technology resources repository that David created. And by forking, I am basically creating an independent version of that repository. And even though it's independent of David's, I'm still able to contribute back to the main repository. And by doing that, I have to create a pull request. So by creating a pull request, it's basically notifying David or the owner of the core repository, the main repository, that there's been an update made and you might want to review it and merge it into the main version of the repository. Next slide, please. So a couple things to be aware of when you create your pull requests is you have the opportunity, once you make your edits, to compare the changes to the main repository. And once you are able to compare those, and as David mentioned earlier, you have the green and the red, and you can see the changes that you made. And you're able to compare those to the main repository to see if maybe somebody else had made some updates as well. And whoever is the administrator of the main repository can make the decision of when they're going to accept those pull requests and merge those files in. Sometimes it'll show you those edits from others, and you can make a decision to actually pull those edits down into your own repository version and then integrate that and edit off of that as well before you decide to push it up or push and commit and make a pull request. So the next slide is going to go back to David about merging.
Thanks, Marshall. So once that pull request was made by Marshall, on my end, what I see is, okay, somebody wants to contribute to the repository. I can review the changes that they made, hit merge pull request, and if it successfully merges and there's no conflicts, it will say, update of data standard specifications, and the merge commit will be merged into the master repository and be reflected on the web page that we set up for that. So this kind of goes over the real basics of GitHub and how it can serve as a platform for a different type of collaboration. And the planning technology resources repository is supposed to be very similar to other repositories that I've gotten inspiration from, and others have in the technology division as well, such as the Open Sustainable Technology repository. For those who are curious, there are tons of resources of people trying to work on issues that I think are very important to planners that might have something that you can find useful. And we're hoping to create a shared resource with the planning technology resources repo together that can add a similar contribution to planners and planning. So, for example, the main goals that we have for this planning technology resources repository is we want to provide a safe practice area for anybody to contribute. You know, this is a great time and great repository to take what we've talked about in this presentation and maybe try and do some contributions of your own for data sets that you use in your day-to-day work or that you find valuable. And also it's to kind of help us build a useful resource that can be collectively constructed by the planning community and demonstrate our ability to engage with those resources critically. And we have reached the end of our presentation. This is our contact information. If you have any questions, this would be the time to ask them. Thank you for bearing with us so far. Oh, and I kind of wanted to navigate the planning technology resources repo as I remembered. So maybe I might actually, before we go too deep in the Q&A, I kind of want to show you.
Yeah, take your time. We have just a couple questions coming in, so you have plenty of time. And folks, again, just type your questions in that chat box and we'll get to them here shortly.
Can you see my screen in terms of the planning technology resources repository?
Yes.
Excellent. So one of the things I wanted to do is just kind of show what this repository looks like, how it looks. You know, for those who want to contribute but find GitHub still intimidating on this particular repository, we also have a Google form where you can just open that up and say what you want to contribute, the name of the resource, any notes, and we'll try and incorporate it as we have time. But you know, based on everything we've learned here, we're very interested to see people try and learn and test out doing a lot of this stuff themselves, filing issues, etc. And those would all be great things to do. In terms of the types of things that we're looking to add, you know, we have a list of public data resources. Some are very familiar, some might not be, relating to equity and environmental justice, environment, open data sites that have lots of good resources, and other types of national or global data sets that might be of interest to planners. So one example might be, you know, if I go to the About page for the national noise map, you know, this takes you to this page. You can find out more about the tool, and you know, you can even take a look at it as well. So this is a resource where if you have any concerns about noise pollution, you can just, you know, look at everything from airports to heavily trafficked arterials and get a sense of, you know, what the exposure to noise might be based off of proximity to those types of facilities in your community. You know, so those are the types of things that we're really hoping to find and add to this repository. And I'll zoom in just to help people see. And I can even show you, you know, our cross-linking to other similar resources. You know, we mentioned a lot of them here, so I'm just going to open them up so that we can kind of take a look at them. You know, we mentioned Awesome Transit at the beginning, and you can just see all the stuff that people have put together for different types of resources and tools, web applications, GTFS data processors and converters and utilities. And there's just a ton of stuff here. And it's just really worth keeping track of, just a lot of this stuff. so that if you don't have to reinvent the wheel where possible. And other resources, I mentioned the Open Sustainable Technology repository, and they have so much stuff here. Like if you're interested in energy or anything related to plants, natural resources, they probably have something for you here that might be worth considering. So, you know, energy consumption, efficiency, building in cities, half of these things, I don't know what they are, but, you know, let's take a look at one of them and see what that's looking like. So hot maps, an open source mapping and planning tool for heating and cooling. What is that? So look here, talks about how to build, you know, an application that's specific to heating and cooling. I don't know much about it, but you know, you can just click around and you can find out more about those resources as you're interested. Same thing for other types of applications that you've maybe never heard of. So yeah, that's kind of what we're hoping to show everybody. We invite you to ask questions and take a look at this repository and maybe think about how you can contribute to it, what steps you could take to do that. And yeah, that's it. Do we have any questions at this point, Christine?
Oh yeah. Okay, so if you want to throw your webcams back on, we can, there we go. And if you just want to stop sharing your screen just so we can be in kind of a full screen mode, if you can figure out how to do that.
I will turn that off. There we go.
There you go. Thanks. Okay, so first question. If I manage or own a repository and I receive contributed edits to programming, can I pick and choose what lines of code to accept?
Marshall, do you want to talk through that?
Sure. So yeah, as an owner of a repository, you have the ability to review any of the merge requests that you want to actually bring into your repository. So that's kind of the beauty of it, is being that repository owner. So you are kind of, you basically have the opportunity to go through everything that somebody is interested in sharing with you and contributing to your initial code base. And it could be something you review with some of your collaborators as well. It could be something that you're not sure and you're interested in really evaluating. So it's also an opportunity to reach out to whoever is asking for this pull request and chat with them, network with them, understand where they're coming from, because it may, after a conversation with them, it may make sense to you a little bit more than just reading their code line. So it's really an opportunity to open a conversation up about it and better understand what the enhancement is that they're seeking to contribute.
Yeah.
But yeah, at the end of the day, if you're the owner of the repository, you are the decision maker in what code gets included.
And you can be selective in terms of which lines you review or comment on. It's a little bit, it's not as like intuitive as track changes in Microsoft Word or something similar, but there is a process for how to do that. Any other questions?
Okay. Oh yeah. Next question. Have you used the project functions of GitHub? What is your experience with Kanban? Kanban. They're boards, I guess,
right.
in GitHub.
I don't know. I have my own thoughts on that. I think they can be very useful. I kind of feel like the GitHub specific ones are a little wonky. I don't know, Marshall, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think you need to find the right use case for them. Kanban boards are great because it really helps you organize your workflows, especially if you have a large development team working on a project. I mean, if it's a simple repository, it depends on how you want to coordinate. But project boards are a great way to, project manage. And I've actually tried to extrapolate using a Kanban type board into other project management styles and methodologies. It's basically extrapolating this software-centric way of managing your work into how you manage a complete streets project, if you will. And it really gives you an opportunity to understand task management and how to go about assigning work, finding particular issues that are evolving, and putting that on a calendar. So there's a lot of really great things you can do with project boards. Kanban's just one example of it. Microsoft Teams has a full integration of Planner. You can use that in doing all this work as well. I think another big one is like Trulio or something like that is out there.
Yeah.
Personal favorite of mine, which is unfortunately was deprecated, was Waffle.io. They had a lot of really great content at conferences back in the day, but yeah, it's there's different applications that'll integrate in the web, but also through different applications like Teams or Trulio, or even Slack has some integrations with different project boards too.
And I kind of feel like the GitHub project boards is like one tool among many that might be able to suit your needs.
Thank you. Next question. Regarding forking, do you advocate conditions in which to choose or avoid doing this? And just for terminology, I think forking is when you duplicate, right?
Yeah, it's when you make your own separate duplicate of it, but it still can connect back to the original in some ways. And it's a little complicated when you get into the details. Like, for example, if somebody deletes, there are some conditions where you may not want to fork. When you fork something, if in theory the original repository owner deletes their version of it, the master of it that you forked, that has impacts that cascade down potentially to your repository. And the general piece of advice, maybe I can share my screen again, because this is something we didn't really talk about, but it's worth discussing. Can everybody see the repo again? So when you go to the website, you can see clone or all the other options, fork. And generally, when I guess my advice is, if you just want a copy of the files as they are with not really a connection to GitHub, you can just download a zip of it. And that's just isolated. You just have access to the files, but it has no connection to anything. It's just like, here are your files. And I guess my only thing is, when you fork something, I guess the only impacts worth knowing is that the original owner sees that you forked that repository. So maybe you don't want to say to the world, oh, I'm interested in your stuff. Sometimes you do. You can clone it regardless. But also, if you just want to just take a look at something on your computer and not really commit to working with it on GitHub or contributing, you can just download the zip file and take a look at that too. Marshall, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this gets into a couple of maybe philosophical ideas on how you manage projects and work. And if you're coming from the consulting side, like David and I, you probably want to have that conversation with your client and understand what are their standard practices around their Git repositories. And they may say, hey, just go ahead and fork it and get a pull request locked in. And as you're doing your updates and your work, that pull request, you can easily just hit it, and we will go ahead and review it. And maybe that opens up the conversation with the work that you're completing. On the other side, if you're the owner of the repository, it's a good idea to talk about your strategy and how you want to host that solution, and engage with people that might be contributing. And the other thing I wanted to mention off of one of the things that David was showing was earlier on the sustainable project is being planners and engineers, and you may not be completely tapped into your technology division. So I highly recommend reaching out to your IT director, have lunch with them, have lunch with your IT director, chat with them, and understand where they're at in this process of using Git and using software. Make them a priority on helping you understand, is there an open source solution that's available in GitHub that you can deploy for use internally within your planning division or your department. And by doing that, you're going to begin to help liberate your organization into this world of amazing software, amazing data repositories, and that's going to help you advance your practice as well.
Cool. Next question.
Great. Next question, storage. Let's talk about that. A couple questions about that. So how much space, how much data what's the limit on storage and for GitHub?
Debatable. There are actual limits, generally the rule of thumb is you don't want a repo whose size is greater than 100 megabytes. Is that right? I mean, you can get bigger ones, but like I think GitHubs are much larger. Like the actual stop is like measured in. So, do you remember what the limit is offhand?
I don't want to get into the limits of repository sizes. I want you to focus on the fact that your Git repo is not for hosting data.
Right.
You want to keep your data in a database or whatever CSV file. The focus you want to have on using Git is for your software development, for your data repository development, and how that will connect to your data resource. It's not something, I mean, if it's a small file, you have a demonstration of it, shouldn't be an issue. To David's point, there is a limit to how much you want to put up there, and that's going to have trickle-down effects on how a repository gets pulled down, how you work through it. But at the end of the day, you're going to be connecting to your data resources independent of the repository itself. Most repositories will have the applicable practice of how to get a full data connection. And in this case that David's showing right here, it's basically pushing you to an external data resource that's hosted elsewhere. It's not sitting in Git itself.
Right. Yeah, and that's the only reason I'm pulling this up is, there are lots of repositories where there'll be a GitHub display of the data resource where everything's shown, but they'll store it either on Amazon or some other database repository where you can download everything. There are some people that do store data on GitHub. It's not advised, but there are some data resources that you might find that are stored locally, but they tend to be very small. They're sample data sets, they're test data sets, or there's something else that's being associated with the operations that are of interest there.
And I think something you'll see in the curated repositories, and David, maybe you want to bring this up, is some of the data specifications. Now, the specification itself is really just the hierarchy of the data resource, but it's not the actual data itself. So, for example, the GBFS, the General Bike Share Feed Specification, that is its own Git repository. It sets the framework of how you create the data, but it doesn't include the data itself. All those GBFS data resources are available independently in, hosted usually by the city itself or by the bike share company on behalf of the jurisdiction.
And that's something worth kind of thinking about, like GBFS or KurbLR. I think KurbLR does have some examples of what those data sets might look like in their repo, but they don't store all of the KurbLR data sets in the world on their repository. They tend to be elsewhere as well. And you'll also see that people use different websites and resources to have you know, to give people more information in a more readable way than you might be able to get with just the GitHub repository, and that's a very common thing too. But unlike the websites where they say, you know, where they might have an email or something, typically, you know, a lot of these websites that they might have say, you want to get involved, go back to GitHub. and because that's where they're engaging with issues and dealing with questions that might come up as part of their work.
There are a couple questions coming in around privacy and let's see, I've heard some planners express concern about open source software because of privacy concerns. Can you speak to that at all? And then another question related to it is viruses, malware for downloading zip files from GitHub.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could kind of speak to all of that.
Yes, be careful what you download on the internet still applies, I think, on this. But I'll take a first shot, and I'm going to let Marshall take it if that's all right. My 2 cents on the privacy issue. I guess it depends on what you're talking about. You know, there's code, different types of code can have obvious privacy issues. If it's hard to know if you're deploying a web application and what it's doing is collecting metadata on the users that you intended to have use it, and it's sending it to some central repository, you know, yeah, maybe that is possible and that does happen. But at the same time, you know, that's something where you, before you deploy something, making sure you're talking to, you know, the very technical staff in your organization and taking a look at that. That's something you'll want to do. In terms of malware, most things I've encountered, that's not a real concern, although there are some things where, of course, that might be, but it's probably, it does exist. I don't know, what are your 2 cents on that, Marshall, on both questions?
Well, since you just started with malware, I think the majority of the software that's being developed in Git is legit. You shouldn't worry about the malware, but to David's point, if you're downloading something, you're on the internet, and just know what you're dealing with. I mean, if you're seeing, at the end of the day, the legitimate software that you're interested in or data specification that you're interested in is going to have a lot of documentation behind it, and you know, you can always reach out to the repository owner and do your due diligence before you engage with that software. Of course, stay away from really wonky stuff. It's pretty evident what they are. But yeah, just be careful around that. I think around privacy, like David mentioned earlier, there's a lot of context in there, and it could be a whole different thing. I mean, if you're talking about your personal privacy in Git, that's something different than privacy from an application and how data is being collected or used in that application. Like, for example, the ACLU brought a lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles about the MDS specification for scooter data and how it was tracking people using scooters. And I just read here that the federal judge last week dismissed this lawsuit. I don't know the specifics of that, but I'd be really curious. So, you know, that's, the MDS was developed in Git as well, and you can go and track it and see how that data specification was created. The actual application and use of MDS is a little bit different because it's actually how the scooter companies are collecting your data using your mobile app to unlock the scooter itself, and how that information is being shared. But you know, all of that is handled, and you're by using that application, you're signing up to share your information there. Right. So transitioning into your privacy within Git itself is, you know, you reveal what you want in your profile, but you know, take it with a grain of salt and take your due diligence in protecting your information.
Yeah, I think just when you're talking about yourself as a user on GitHub, just, you know, reveal what you want to reveal, but consider that it is it's a public forum. Microsoft, asks for your email and those types of things, and you should just conduct yourself accordingly. I think that's my only point of advice there.
Okay, thank you. So there are quite a few questions that are rather technical, which makes me think that there's quite a few people on the line that are familiar with GitHub, that know this, or that are comfortable with code and just all this kind of stuff. But for the
Sure.
folks on the line that are like, huh, what's GitHub? I don't know. I'll listen to this webcast. And now that they're in it and they're like, well, this is really interesting, but I know nothing about it. I know nothing about coding. I even personally, I had gone to the GitHub website way back when we scheduled this thing, and I'm like, wow, this site to me in my brain is super clunky. I have no idea what any of this is. I happen to see some interesting stuff. I don't want to click anything that's going to download and get weird.
Right.
Where do people begin? For the folks on the line, for the planners that maybe don't have a huge planning department, that don't have a big IT department, but kind of want to dabble in, where do they begin?
Well, I think they should begin at the Planning Technology Resources Repository.
That was not a setup, people, by the way.
No,
it's a safe place too.
Right, it's a safe
There you
place
go.
to go do that if you're really concerned. I think for us, like Marshall and I are just used to just trawling around, seeing what's online and what's in GitHub. It is wonky. Some people give their things that they build more versus less attention. Some people want it to be used by other people, and so they document it accordingly. Some people don't care. So it's just one of those things where, in terms of where to begin, just setting up an account, downloading GitHub Desktop, so that it's easy for you to pull things down if you really want to, would be my advice. And you can always start with the Planning Technology Resources Repository. Marshall, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I think really when David pitched the idea to me, I was like, yeah, this is great. I mean, it's a wonderful place to expose everyone to how to use Git and some of the resources that are available. And being curators of the repository, we want to share with you some of the things that we're excited about in planning applications, and encourage you to explore it in this environment, which David's taken the lead in curating a lot of these great resources that are available here. So it's really jump in the pool, make a cannonball, have fun with it, check it out, don't be shy, and David and I are always available to help out, and so shout out. You have our LinkedIn contacts, our emails. Feel free to reach out and say, hey, I having some issue here. I don't understand this. There's also tons of great resources online that can help familiarize yourself with this information as well. But the repository that David created, it's a great place to go and just explore, click through it, read up on it. And I also encourage you to download GitHub Desktop and clone it or fork it, and just test that out. Don't be scared of it, don't be shy with it, and have fun with it. And you can go into one of the repositories and add your jurisdiction's open data portal to it or something like that.
Yeah. And I think the only thing I might add is, this is a repository sponsored by the technology division. You can also join the APA Technology Division's organization within GitHub if you're interested, just to give you a sense of the benefit of doing that. If you have a repository already, this is my profile that I'm showing. The technology division logo and everything shows up as one of the organizations I'm a part of. So that's another way to get involved, if you want to just start on the easy end. So that's the only other thing I'd say there.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, and leave that up for a minute. Several people were looking for the link to the tech.planning.org. Is that where they can get all more information on the planning resource page and all of that?
Yeah. That there is a link to the planning technology resources repo
Yeah.
and that type of thing there.
Okay, good.
Yes, and we have our division Gmail also if you have any questions.
Okay. All right, good. There are a couple more questions and we do have time, so I'm just going to go ahead and run through these real quick. They're a little more technical for those folks that know what they're talking about.
Well, those are the folks that are here to make us nervous, so that's great.
Well, good. This will be fun then. Okay. This one is there a resource for learning about GitHub and how to use it that is similar to the Esri MOOC format?
Good question. There are lots of resources about Git and GitHub. Like a lot of the images that we have here are pulled from those. A lot of them take the form of Medium posts and stuff like that. In terms of a MOOC, do you know of any Git MOOCs, Marshall? No.
I do not off the top of my head.
I don't either. There's
got to be some of them out
For
there.
those of you that have no idea what it is, because I didn't and I had to Google it, it's MOOC stands for Massive Open Online Courses. So essentially it's like, I assume like just big forums for learning about stuff.
Like everything from Coursera is a good example. There aren't many that are dedicated to just Git or GitHub. There are probably tons of YouTube videos. If you really wanna, looking up a YouTube video about Git or GitHub might also help. And this will be recorded and put on YouTube, I think, at some point. So I think you can refer back to this presentation as well.
Yep. Okay. Next question. What has been your experience deploying GitHub resources at public agencies? Any best practice recommendations for a user group with mixed levels of experience with Git, coding, just all of this technology stuff?
That's a good question. I guess the first thing I would say is if you're an agency and you're considering developing a GitHub, consider and look at other agencies that have done similar things and how they've done it and what things that they've put on their repositories. Other things you can think about is, a lot of cities have open data portals where they can distribute data to the public, but sometimes the tools that they've paid their contractors or consultants to build, they just keep internally, even though there might be people that want to improve it or take a look at it or use it in their community online. So maybe think about how a GitHub will fit into your RFP process if you're asking people to build you tools. Say and have some language that says, at the end of this project, we would like it if you could contribute this to our GitHub with the appropriate documentation for it. And you can host everything from GIS tools to other types of things that might be useful there. Marshall, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, those are all really great tips, David. I think a few other things to consider are who are your neighbors and who are your funding sources, and going up, down, sideways, left, right. Yeah, MPOs are starting to have Git resources, and your MPO is going to be your direct funding resource. So chat with them, see what they have to offer you. Maybe they have an infrastructure that is something they can share with you. As I mentioned earlier too, it's like chat with your IT director, and or if you're a very small jurisdiction or company, chat with your IT consultant, as they might have an opportunity for exploring different venues. Maybe chat with a neighboring jurisdiction and collaborate that way. Maybe there's a shared resource you can create. There's lots of different ways that you can pivot and use this as a functional resource. So, and as I mentioned earlier, there's tiers of licensing. There's free versions, there's enterprise versions that could be locked and integrated with your Active Directory. There's different ways to do it. Internally, we use GitLab. You can use GitLab's an open source version of a Git repository, and you can deploy that on your own infrastructure and use that for your own projects. So there's tons of different ways to do this, but I think at the end of the day, you want to have the right people and having the right discussions. So who supports your infrastructure internally, externally, and who are the folks that are going to be contributing, and get a working group together and have that conversation.
We touched on this a little bit earlier, but to kind of deep dive into it, have you how have you managed documentation of issues and resolutions of issues on GitHub for quality control purposes?
I think generally when I've looked at issues, it's sometimes someone raising a question or concern. As part of like a QA QC type of process, sometimes that's handled as part of a pull request process as well as an issue. Like issue is kind of more open-ended rather than we might see elsewhere. Marshall, I don't know, have you used them for that type of purpose?
Well, I think a good relationship is going back to the question on project boards, and using project boards to coordinate QA/QC is in a very effective way of deliberately doing that.
Quality assurance versus quality control.
Correct.
I'm just trying to help with the lingo for those that are on the line.
Thank you for that. I think the other side of it too is depending on the size of the project or the software, you might have weekly or in what's called a scrum. It's basically a meeting to discuss the next step of your development. What are now we're getting into a little bit of more software-centric lingo. What's a blocker? And for a software company, they have a blocker. That means they've hit a wall on software. There's a bug. They got to get over it. So they're throwing all their resources at figuring out what's this issue, what's this problem, and that's where you use a Kanban board and you have your scrum. Software companies have daily scrums, hourly scrums, depending on what they're working on. For a lot of the work that we would be doing, probably weekly, monthly, bi-weekly, it would be sufficient depending on how heavy you need to do it. But using a project board is a really great way of helping guide you through the QA and QC processes.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to frame it.
This question here, I think they took a look at the repo that you all have together, and it looks like it's primarily national or non-location specific resources. And they're asking if this is something that you're interested in expanding. And then they're also volunteering. So I'm going to ask this person to reach out directly to you guys to lend your proofing and what interest. But so yeah, talk a little bit about, I guess, what you have set up specifically and where you're thinking it's going to go.
Yeah, I think one of the questions I've been wondering is, should we have a separate page for international resources too? Because the geographic coverage is one of the things that we kind of talked about as like something that, and we don't even know if we want to track that as much as we were. But we're open to expanding it. People have ideas. Maybe we find a way to subdivide it or put it into an existing category. And again, a good portion of this is if you have interests and you want to volunteer and you have ideas and things that we could add, make a pull request, you know, and you'll be able to do that. Or file an issue if you have an open-ended question, like if you're talking about expanding it. That's a perfect thing for an issue. You know, let's start a conversation and we'll chat back and forth about it in terms of what that idea is.
Yeah, I would say if you have a very centralized local type of project, include it, you know, because that could grow some legs and be replicated nationally or regionally. So it you know, think of it as a great place to share and a forum for getting feedback from your contemporary planners and technologists.
Yeah, and I guess like one thing I do want to say is we are looking for resources that have broad applicability. If there's something that's very location specific or very technical, you know, maybe we can talk about where those resources belong within the repo, but we're not against not taking contributions. We just got to talk about the appropriate place.
Okay, I think I see one more question that we can get to, and then we'll wrap up. Which resource would be best to build a collaborative planner's dictionary or resource of land use types?
Interesting. I mean, this could be a place to start that conversation. I mean, we could link to a repo like that in the repository, but I don't know that there, in terms of land use typologies, I don't know of any repos that have talked about standards for that. If somebody finds one, I would like it in our repo for data resources or data specifications. You know, we have, I don't know, what are your thoughts on that, Marshall? Do you know of anything along those lines?
I don't. I know there's some guidance on it, but I mean, also, how do you want to categorize it?
Right.
You know, so there's a lot of opportunity there. So I think it's a great topic. It's a great new library inside of the repo. I mean, how many land uses are there, and then how do you create a topology for them, right? And I think APA's got a hierarchy of it to a degree, but there's so much more that's taking place, and how you want to pivot and use it, and lots of opportunity there.
Typology is also, I mean, just to get into the weeds a little bit, like typology is such an open-ended word. You know, there's like the California Air Resources Board definitions of like transportation land use typologies that are used to, you know, adjust for VMT, and then there's, you know, zoning classifications, general plan classifications, comprehensive plans. You can just go all over the place. So yeah, I think somebody needs to create a repo along those lines, and when you do, there will be a home for it in the Planning Technology Resources Repository.
And this last question is really for me. Are there any PAS reports or anything that just kind of summarizes the whole concept of GitHub as it relates to planners and applications for it, just like a quick and dirty? No?
Not to my knowledge, and I've actually looked at them fairly recently. There have been a lot of good PAS reports and quick notes on emerging topics on everything from artificial intelligence to digital twins. I'm actually myself working on a planning advisory service memo on.
Again, I did not set you up for that.
No, I got that. I don't think there is something as specific to GitHub. It might be worthy of a quick notes, but I think that needs to be discussed with APA. Not to my knowledge, do I know of anything specific to GitHub?
Okay. All right. Well, I think we're gonna wrap up. Thank you both for joining us. As someone whose brain doesn't do this stuff really, I understood it. So you have that.
We'll take it.
Yeah, awesome.
This was wonderful. So thank you to the technology division of APA for joining us today. Make sure you check out their resources. Be sure to join the division, lend a hand if you can. This webcast is being recorded. We'll post it on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube. Don't forget to log your AICP CM credits. They're worth 1.5. What else? We'll have this slide deck will be available on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. And don't forget to register for our upcoming sessions. Like us on Facebook, because we have a bunch more coming down the pipeline that I'll be putting up on our website here shortly, so you can register for them. And I think that's it. So thank you, David and Marshall, for joining us today and kind of giving us this sort of bird's eye view of a great resource for us planners. Everyone, hey, have a great weekend, and we'll talk next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care. Thanks, everyone.